Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Mary if you're new here, and today's video is going to be touching base on all the series that I have started, continued in, or completed in 2020. And then at the end I'll talk about some series that I'm hoping to get to in 2021. So I don't know what I'm titling this video yet, but basically I just wanted to discuss some of the series that I've read this year and sort of give a brief overview of them and then talk about the series that I want to pursue in 2021, I guess. If you have not seen any videos from me before, hello, thank you so much for joining me. I don't like to start a lot of series that aren't completed, and I don't like to be in the middle of a lot of series at once. I typically will pick up a series or a first book in a series and then try to get the second and third books the next month or one a month. I don't like to pick up book one in a series in March and then not read anything else from that series for 2 years before another book comes out. There are some series that I'm going to talk about today that I picked up that aren't completed or that only have one book out, or I picked it up right when it came out. We'll talk about it when we get to it. And if I'm looking down, I'm looking at my laptop because I don't know exactly how many books that I've read that are part of series, but this will be in the order that I read them in this year. So the first book that I actually completed this year was the Amber Spyglass, which is the third book in the His Dark Materials series, the box set by Philip Pullman. It's pretty shiny. But these, basically, if you're not sure what this is about or you haven't heard of this before, there's a movie with Nicole Kidman that you could watch that, I mean, I remember liking, but I haven't seen it since it first came out. There's also a TV show on HBO. I think it's on one of the streaming services that we had at the beginning of lockdown, so we watched a couple episodes of, and then we no longer had, because I'm pretty sure it was a family member who had it, who got rid of it, but I think it was HBO. But I did finish that series at the beginning of this year. I finished it in April. I didn't read a single book this year before April, so that's just my life. I started rereading that series last year. That's when I read the first two books, but it follows Lyra, who's a little girl in basically an alternate dimension of our world. So she lives in Oxford, England, but it's in a different world where they have what's called a demon, which is basically an external projection of your soul in the body of a small animal, or I guess it could be a big animal. But when you hit puberty, your demon stops being able to shapeshift and just becomes one type of animal that is supposed to say a lot about you. It's a very interesting concept. It's a really cool world. I liked the first book better than all the other books. However, in the second book, they go on like a detour to like a split universe. I don't know. You find out that there's lots of like parallel universes basically in this whole world. And it's really interesting in the second book. One of the universes they go to has really interesting like creatures. I don't want to spoil anything, but that was my favorite part probably of the second and third books, was that little section. And when the movie came out, I don't know if other people will remember this, but I went to church a lot as a kid, and I was always at youth group, and I remember my youth group wanted to boycott the movie because they thought that the books were about killing God. So it's really like a commentary on corrupt religious entities based on the Catholic Church. Anyways, we don't have to get into that, but I just remember that being a big thing. But that was the first series that I finished up in 2020. Then I read Alex and Eliza, which I talked about in my most disappointing books of the year. I'm not finishing that series. I read book one and I should have DNF'd it because I just thought it was boring. I won't be continuing. It's basically a fictionalized version of Alexander Hamilton and Eliza Schuyler's story. And the reason I picked it up is because it was supposed to be based on Hamilton. But it turns out that the author just saw Hamilton and was like, oh, I should write a book about them. So she wrote a book series, and it's not historically accurate, and it's not based on Hamilton. So I just didn't find it very interesting. Then I read Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, which technically was a standalone when it was released, but then like 30 years later, the author released like a sequel. I don't have any plans to pick that sequel up. I probably won't. I don't know if that's actually considered a series, but if I find that at like a Savers or a Goodwill or something, I would consider picking it up maybe and reading it, but I have no plans at this moment to read it. Okay, then I read the Hazelwood duology by Melissa Albert, and she's actually coming out with a companion to that in January, which is, I think it's just a release of the fairy tales from Tales from the Hinterland, and I'm interested in picking that up just because I think it's going to be like illustrated and original fairy tales, and I like that kind of thing, so I'm debating on whether or not I'm going to read that. But the Hazelwood basically follows this girl, Alice, who lives with her mother, and Alice's grandmother, her mother's mother, wrote these fairy tales called the Tales from the Hinterland, and Alice has never been allowed to read them because her mom and her grandmother are estranged. And then fairy tale creatures basically from the world that Althea created come out and kidnap Alice's mom. And so Alice has to go back to her grandmother's house and get into the hinterland and save her mom, basically. That's the premise of the first book, and then the second book sort of picks it up from there and gives you more detail about the fairy tales. Super interesting duology. Again, if you like dark fairy tales, if you like sarcastic main characters, it's pretty good. But that also has a companion novel that I ended up reading this year about one of the side characters from the first book. In that book, I can't remember what it's called. But anyways, yeah, I would recommend that series. I liked that one a lot. Then I read 2001: A Space Odyssey. 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke, which is a classic atmospheric sci-fi, first contact with aliens type of book. This technically is part of a series. The next book in it is 2010 Odyssey 2. And I am interested in picking that up, actually. That's one of the books that I want to get to in 2021. My library doesn't have it. And so I would have to buy it from somewhere. But, and they're out of print. So you buy like the cheap paperbacks from wherever you can get them. But I am interested in reading that for sure. I really like this book. This was, again, one of my favorites of the year. I don't think you need to read the other books in the series. I want to say they were also written like an extended time period away from the first book. And I think there's 4. But I'm interested. So I think I am going to try to pick up the second book. And then depending on how that goes, I might continue or I might not. I just think that one left off at an interesting place and I would like to see. Like, I can see how that's a standalone, but I would like to see if the series explores what it was trying to explore a little more in depth. Then I read House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, which is the first book in the Crescent City series. I do own this book, but I gave it to my boyfriend's mom when she was here, so she could read it. She's a big Sarah J. Maas fan. I like this book. I will be continuing the series. Again, I bought that book when it first came, or around the time it came out, because it was so hyped by different booktubers that I watch, and I was shocked that I liked it. I think I gave it 4 stars. But I like devoured it. I read it all in like 2 days. It's not like great literature, but I don't think, if you've read Sarah J. Maas before, I don't think you're expecting that. It's just like very consumable. Super strong characters, very interesting world, lots of magical creatures, which was my like hesitation with it. Because I, prior to this year, didn't read anything that was like super fantasy heavy. Anything that I read that had like spectacular, it was like fantastical elements, like magical realism, which still tends to be my preference. And tends to be what I'm most attracted to, but that book sort of introduced me to the idea that maybe I do. Maybe I'm okay with like a fairy romance, you know? But anyways, that one was good. Then I read The Bear and the Nightingale. I read this back in June. And then that series I actually shelved until November and December of this year. So I have finished that series now. But it is basically based on Russian folklore. It's set in medieval Russia, and it's about like the reconciliation of Christianity with like the pagan religion that was in Russia before Christianity reached it. Super good series, has a little bit of a romance element, primarily in books 2 and 3. If I can link my wrap-ups where I talk about this book more in depth, because I don't really know what all my thoughts are and how I can like describe them without feeling it. But I did finish that series, so I don't have to worry about that anymore. Super good, again, based on like Russian folklore. I think I gave all the books either 3 or 4 stars. And I think I would give the series as a whole 4 stars. Pretty good. Definitely not like my all-time favorite series, but I did enjoy it. Then I read Once in Future by, I think they go by A.R. Capetta, but at the time that I wrote this, it was Amy Rose Capetta. I believe they go by they, them pronouns. I don't know if they're non-binary or what, but not here to misgender anybody. I hated that book. It's on my worst books or / most disappointing books of the year. It's like a sci-fi gender swap retelling of Arthurian legend. My main problems with it were, I didn't like the way that, I don't care if every character is queer. I didn't like the way that all the queerness was handled, because it felt very much like this character has to be gay so they can be with this character, and this character has to be bi so you don't know if they're gonna be with this character or this character. And like all the romancy stuff that was happening, none of the characters' relationships were developed enough, I felt, to make a valid, like, to make me care, I guess, about the romance. So I just wanted the Arthurian legend. I didn't care who was sleeping with who, if that makes sense. It didn't, like, it just felt irrelevant to me. But that's just me again. It sounded really cool. Also, it's set in space because it's sci-fi. One of the planets is like medieval. It's like, if you've ever been to medieval times in the US, I don't know if they have it in other countries, but in the US they have this thing called medieval times, where you go and you get like a color, and then you watch people joust, and you cheer for your color. And if your color wins, you like could potentially get a prize. And you eat with your hands. There's no silverware, so you eat like corn, and it's weird. It's weird shit. So I think it just gave me war flashbacks to being a child, and I was not interested. but I thought that was like cheesy and dumb. It also has a really interesting take on like a war on capitalism, which I thought was really interesting. I thought war on capitalism in space with a little bit of queerness thrown in, but it didn't pan out for me. I was not interested in that book at all. Then I read The Three-Body Problem by Cixin Liu, which is down here. Can you see it? Yeah, this is my box set of that, the green, yellow, blue in the bottom. But anyways, I love this. This, again, was on my favorite series of the year. This probably was my favorite series of the year. And The Three-Body Problem might be my favorite book. I think I liked The Dark Forest more, though, so that might be actually my favorite book. But I read all three of these this year. It's, again, first contact with aliens. In the first book, like, the first thing that happens is they get contacted by these aliens. And it just, like, conceptually was so fascinating to me. But, yeah, super good if you're into hard science fiction. And if you don't necessarily need a ton of like character-driven stories, because to be honest, it's circumstance-driven stories. Each book follows different characters. There's not like a mainstay of the same characters. There's mentions of other characters, and there's like cameos kind of, but each book has a new character that they're following, which I kind of liked. I thought it was really, really fascinating. I feel like it did a really good job of showing how people in like the military and governments and like non-governmental organizations and humanity as a whole would react to the types of things that were happening in the book. And it felt very realistic to me for that reason. Also, the stakes were really high, and even without having any attachment to the characters, I was like tensed up by the height of the stakes, if that makes sense. So yes, I loved that book. Would highly recommend that series. And then I read The Martian by Andy Weir, which I believe Artemis is a sequel to. I'm not going to read Artemis. I gave The Martian 3 stars. I thought it was funny. I thought it was fine. But I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. I felt like I wasn't as connected to the characters, and I wanted it to be more about him surviving on Mars and less about him trying to get rescued. The premise of it is an astronaut gets left behind on Mars because they think he died, but he's not dead, and so he has to survive using his own skills, which is really, really interesting in concept. Something about it didn't really click with me. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood for that kind of story. Maybe I just read too much sci-fi right before it, but didn't love that as much as I wanted to. I also read that in June. But yeah, I'm not reading Artemis. I don't have any plans to, and I don't care if I ever pick it up or not. Then I reread the whole Twilight series so that I could read Midnight Sun. This is my caveat to Twilight. If you read Twilight when you were a kid and you really liked it, or you read Twilight as it was coming out and you like were invested in those characters and you grew up with them, I think it's worth it to pick up Midnight Sun if you still like care. Just because, I mean, it was interesting. I feel like there were enough interesting parts of it that it was worth it. But if you don't care that much, obviously don't pick it up. And if you like would rather just watch someone else's video talking about it, Books with Emily Fox did a really good spoilery vlog of it. So I would recommend that. But I read it. I thought it was fine. I read all those books leading up to it, and then I read that this year. But that was all, again, everything in that was a reread except for the companion stuff. So I read Life and Death for the first time. It sucked. Don't read Life and Death. It's literally just if they renamed all the characters to have the opposite gender's name, which I thought was stupid and didn't really do anything. I don't understand the point of it. I did like The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner if you wanted more world building from Twilight, and I was hoping that Midnight Sun would also offer a little bit more world building because we were going to get it from Edward's point of view and he's a vampire, so I thought he would like know more about it, but it was just about pining, so not really my thing. Then I read Middle Game by Sean McGuire, another of my favorite books of the year. This is about alchemy, and it's about twins who, one is skilled with languages, one is skilled with numbers, and they're separated at birth, but they can communicate through quantum entanglement. Very fascinating, lots of really interesting things in this book, and I believe this is going to have companion novels, or I think it's technically sequels, like they happen chronologically after this, but it doesn't follow the characters from this. Kind of like, I think that's how her Wayward Children series kind of is. I could be wrong, I've never read that. I would like to, but I haven't so far. But yes, I read this year. Then also in July, I DNF'd American Assassin, which is the prequel to the Mitch Rapp series. I think to give that series an actual fair shake, instead of reading the first book on Goodreads, I should have read them in publication date order, because maybe I would have liked it more, because people love that series, but just wasn't for me. I DNF'd it, I didn't care. Then I read The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which is the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicles, which is supposed to be a trilogy, but the third book hasn't come out yet, and it has no plan on coming out. I think the last book came out in 2014 or 2015. Or was it 2011? No, I think the first book came out. I don't know. I don't know when these books were released. I'm realizing now. But anyways, I read that. I thought it was good. I liked the first, chunk of it better than, the last quarter, probably, maybe even the last third. I wasn't into the romantic thing that was trying to happen. I just didn't care anymore. I liked the concept of this guy at a bar telling his story in 3 nights. So it's 3 books, and each book is one of the days that he's telling a story or whatever. I thought that was really cool. I thought the magic system was really interesting, and I want to know, like, sort of what happened to this guy, because he's supposed to be, like, the best warlock of all time, but then, just frankly, until the 3rd book is on shelves, I'm not reading any of those books anymore. I just don't care enough. I just can't handle that, so, not for me. And I read Gwendy's Button Box by Stephen King, right here, which is a novella that he co-wrote with Richard Chismar, I think is how you pronounce that. This is like a sort of sci-fi-y, fantasy-ish, not really horror, I don't know. It's about this little girl who a strange man approaches her and gives her a box with a bunch of buttons on it. And each button represents a continent, and so if you push a button, you can make something bad happen on one of those continents, and then there's another button that you push and you can get chocolate. I don't know, so basically she had like all the power in the world. Oh. Apparently this is part of the saga of Castle Rock. So if you've read more from Stephen King about that, maybe you would like this more. I found this at a Savers and thought it was interesting, and I wanted to read more Stephen King this year, and I did that. But just generally, I didn't really love this. I thought it was fine, like I said, but it wasn't like great. And so I would pick up the second one if I saw it in a bookstore, but I'm not gonna like rush out and get it. Then I also read the Winter's Trilogy this year by Marie Rutkoski. It's The Winter's The Winter's Curse, The Winter's Crime, and The Winter's Kiss is the final book. This is the one that I have. I finished this most recently, so I still have it out from my library. It's just a fantasy romance, a YA fantasy romance series about Kestrel, who is the daughter of the Valorian general, and Aaron, who is a Hurani slave. And in the first book, Kestrel buys Aaron, and then they sort of have a weird Stockholm Syndrome-y romance. I buy into the romance more and more as the books go on. And the 3rd book, I think, was the best for, like, romantic content and just for, like, character development, frankly. But basically, in this world, the Valorians are, like, a military empire, and they're taking over. There's the Eastern nations, and then Huron, and they've taken over Huron, and it implies that they've taken over other places as well. And they're at war with the East, and it's just about, like, it's about Kestrel reconciling how she feels about war in the way that her, like, country sort of does things. And also how she feels about the people of Huron, because she grew up in Huron as a colonizer, but she grew up with the Hurani people. She grew to love the culture of Huron. Valorians don't have any art, they don't have any music, and she loves art and music, so it's really interesting, to say the least. I liked it, but I feel like every time I describe it, it sounds bad. Okay, then I read The Bride Test, another one of my favorite books of the year, by Helen Wong, which is, she basically writes, she's a woman with autism, and she writes characters with ASD as well. And it's like romances with those characters, which I really appreciate personally. I've talked about this in my best books of the year, so I'll just link that video because this video is getting really long and I don't really want to sum up all of these. But this is in a series that's kind of, it's a series of standalones. So you can read each of them on their own. This is the 2nd book. The first one is The Kiss Quotient, and it just features characters that like intertwine. So all of the characters from this book, or some of the characters from this book, show up in other books and vice versa. So I did really enjoy that, and I do plan on reading the other ones, but I'm not in a rush to do so because you don't really need to retain anything to read the other ones, if that makes sense. Okay, then I read a couple of graphic novels in October because I own them. So I read the first one in The Umbrella Academy and the first one in The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I don't plan on continuing in either of those. I think I'm more of a like read a full bind up of a graphic novel type thing than just read like one issue. I just don't care that much. I also don't really love superhero stories. I'm not really into superheroes generally. I don't know, something about it doesn't really interest me, so probably won't read any of those. Then I read Wolf Hall, right here, by Hilary Mantel. It's book 1 in the Thomas Cromwell series. I've heard other people say that it's the hardest one to get into and the hardest one to follow because it has the least actual historical context. So Mantel just sort of did what she wanted, and her writing style was really hard to get into for me. I ended up giving this 2 stars, and it's on my most disappointing books of the year list. So if you haven't seen that video, I would recommend watching it. But I, at this point, don't have any plans to continue in the series, but I might. I still might. I still have that interest there because I want it. I've heard so many people rave about it, and I want to get it, but I don't. Oh, hell yeah. We're towards the end. In December, for the Reindeer Readathon, spoiler alert, I read To All the Boys I Loved Before by Laura Jean Covey, by Jenny Han, because I love this movie. So my boyfriend got me this for my birthday. And I just was in the mood for like a feel-good Christmassy read. This isn't super Christmassy, but they do celebrate Christmas during the events of this book, so I count it. But yeah, I read that, loved it. I hate the characters in it though. I feel like I just love it because I love the movie so much, but the way this one ends is very common to like serialized YA at this time, where it sort of ends on like a cliffhanger to where technically you know what's gonna happen, so like it could be a standalone, and a lot of people have said that. But I picked the second one right away because I was like, the movie has a definitive ending and the book did not, and I want to know. So it's interesting to see that like the movie combined books 1 and 2 together. And the second movie, I've seen that as well, and I hated the second movie, but I don't mind the second book. I still think some of the characters are crappy, but I feel differently about the characters in the books than I did in the movie. I don't know. We don't have to get into it right now, but I'm just not Team Peter in the books, which is so weird because Peter Kavinsky in the movies is the love of my life. I love him. Noah Centineo he does such a good job of making Peter like sweet the whole time in the movies, and in the books he's not sweet. He's a teenage boy. He's kind of a jerk. But yeah, so anyways, I'm reading the second one right now, or I'm listening to it on audio, and then when I finish it, I'll pick up the third, so whether that'll bleed over into January or not, I'm not sure, but I am planning on continuing that series, and that's it. Those are the series that I have for this year. So, that's a lot. I didn't count how many, but I've been talking for 30 minutes. Hopefully this video isn't 30 minutes long, because I don't think anyone's going to want to watch that. But now I'm going to get into the book series that I'm wanting to read in 2021. There's a few. So if I don't finish this before the end of the year, I would like to finish this. Maybe I would like to pick up the Kiss Quotient. It's not really like top priority for me, to be honest with you. I do want to pick up the Bone Witch series by Rinch Pecco, which is a YA fantasy about necromancy, basically. And it sounds really interesting, and I've heard other people talk about it, but I don't really know any spoilers about it, and I just would like to read it. I also want to read The Beautiful and the Damned by Renee Ahdieh, and I want to read her 1001 Arabian Nights retellings. It's The Wrath and the Dawn, and I don't remember what the second one is called. But I do definitely want to read both of those series. Renee Ahdieh is an author that I would really like to read from, and my boyfriend's mom keeps telling me how great it is. And speaking of that, I want to read Lord of the Rings, because we own them. I also want to read ACOTAR, because I have 3 of those. So I have ACOTAR, ACOMAF, and the Frost and Starlight, which I think is a companion and not one of the full works. But I don't know. Either way, I have those, and I would like to read those. So those are some of the series that I'm really interested in. Oh, and the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, because all of this won the Hugo. So if you have any other series in mind that you think I should look into, please tell me. But those are the ones that I really want to get to in 2021, and I want to read 2010 Odyssey 2 by Arthur C. Clarke, because I just want to know if it's good. And if it is good, then I will continue in that series. But if it's not good, then I'll just sort of say goodnight to that dream of mine. But yeah, that's it. Those are the series that I've read in 2020 and that I would like to continue or start or finish or whatever in 2021. I'm still pretty excited that I've been able to pick up series and finish them. So I don't really have any that are carrying over except for possibly this one. This one technically, but I'm not in a rush to finish it. And Thomas Cromwell, if I do decide to finish it. Like most of the series that I haven't continued in are series that I don't know if I'm going to. Except for 2001: A Space Odyssey, but I just have to find 2010 and then buy it. But yeah, that's it. Let me know what series you read this year, what series you recommend that I read based on my preferences of these series. And if you've read any of these books, please let me know how you felt about them. But that's going to be it for today's video from me, and I will see you in the next one.